Okay, welcome everyone to Polytalk EDU. I would like to welcome back Professor Tom Paterson from Harvard University. Welcome back, Tom.
Oh, thanks, Mohsen.
I appreciate you being here. Today we're going to be just focusing on the outlook for the upcoming presidential election 2024. We're going to talk about the prospects of if the election is going to be held soon. I mean, who has the best chance of winning, and also talk about the fact that this campaign it's been nothing but unconventional. I mean, it's not conventional in any way, stretch or form. It seems like in many ways we have two incumbents running for office. Uh, that's just the way it feels because we got a current president and just a former president. So, Tom, what's your kind of give us a general broad outlook about the upcoming 2024 presidential election?
Well, let me just pick up on the incumbency factor there first, Mohsen. I think no one's framed it in quite this way, but one of the advantages of being the incumbent is under Justice Department rules, you're kind of free of prosecution where you're in the White House office, so you can't be in the docket. So, but Donald Trump is not in office and is in the docket in New York at the moment. So, the incumbency advantage, there is a real incumbency advantage that goes with being incumbent in this particular case. But more broadly, I think we had the most predictable primary season that we've had in a long time. There was virtually no suspense about who was going to win the Democratic nomination or the Republican nomination. There's some things that we could talk about there. The uncommitted vote on the Democratic side, and Nikki Haley's performance, and pretty good in some states on the Republican side, but it wasn't the normal excitement. Pretty predictable. But we're probably entering one of the least predictable general elections we've had in a long time. I think if anyone thinks they know what is going to happen in early November, they probably do think so. but basically, flip a coin and give me a story is the way I would put it. I think they're pretty much deadlocked in the polls, and so we'll just see where this goes over the next several months. And I think it's conceivable that either of these individuals could end up, and at least right now. I'm not talking about what it might look like in June or what it might look like in September, but at the moment, looks to be pretty close to a toss-up election.
Okay. And what is the impact, in your opinion, thus far in this campaign, in this election, of third-party candidacy? RFK is pulling, strongly in certain states, and he's not doing very well in other states as well. And then history has told us that sometimes when you have a formidable third-party candidate, it has a kind of an impact state by state, which supposedly can take away.
Yeah.
What's your take on RFK and then third parties' participation and their impact in general in this election?
Yeah, I mean, with RFK, aside from the fact that he's totally ill-suited for the presidency, which is a side issue, right? I don't mind third-party candidates. You'd like them to be have some of what we look for in a president, and he doesn't have any political experience. He obviously pretty easily sold on some pretty wild ideas and the like. So whether he's got one foot on the ground and the other one in some alternative world, I think is an interesting question about RFK Jr. By the way, I met him, by the way, years and years ago when he was just a kid. So,
Yeah.
But if you look at the third party candidates, and let's just go back into let's do post World War II.
Okay.
So most of the time, they've not had a lot of staying power. So an example of that was John Anderson in 1980. John Anderson had run in the Republican primaries and lost, along with other candidates, to Ronald Reagan, who became the Republican nominee. And John Anderson thought that Reagan was too far to the right, didn't represent what he thought Republicanism at the time represented. Now, he ran an independent campaign after he lost in the primaries, and was polling about at the level in this point in the 1980 campaign that Robert Kennedy Jr. is polling. But by November, he'd really faded, almost out of sight. Then you look at Ross Perot in 1992, right?
Yes.
So he ends up with 19% of the vote
Sure.
in early November, the best showing by a third-party candidate since Theodore Roosevelt ran as the Bull Moose candidacy in
1912.
1920.
Yes.
So in that case, and actually there was a point earlier in the campaign, about this time in the campaign, that Perot was about even with the two-party nominees,
Sure.
something we have not seen at any time in the modern history of public opinion polling.
Right.
We don't know what the situation might have been in 1912 because we weren't doing scientific polling then. But I mean, this was an unbelievable phenomena that
Sure.
you would have a third-party candidate that would
Yeah.
be even, and then of course in June he dramatically, unexpectedly drops out of the race.
Right.
Then he decides in September.
And he comes back again and
Come
during
back
the
in,
debates
and he came back in not in the high 20s where he had been, but
yes.
in the teens, and he
Right.
stayed there. So, you know, we don't have a lot of examples to work off of, but the ones that we do have, sometimes they have a little staying power, and
Right.
sometimes not. But then, as you know, Mohsen, on the edges, you always have the Jill Steins and the like of the third party world.
Right.
You know, they never get into double digits. They always hang down there in the low single digits. But sometimes they can be spoilers. It appears, for example, that in 2016, Jill Stein, and then there was another third party ticket that drew a couple of percentage points that for both of those candidacies, according to the polls at least, if they hadn't been in the race, most of their votes would have gone to Hillary Clinton.
Sure.
And if that would have been the case, we would never have known a Donald Trump presidency. Sure. Ralph Nader, quite
2000.
tipped the 2000 election to George W. Bush. So there's another third party candidate, a spoiler. So I think if we're looking to the Robert Kennedy candidacy this time, we have two questions. What's he going to be polling in November? And two, from whom?
Right.
Where are the votes going to come from? They're going to come mostly on the Trump column or mostly out of the Biden column? And will it be big enough to tip it to the other guy?
Sure. I think one person was jokingly talking about RFK Jr. He said he's putting about 12 to 15% in his own family, you know. After the endorsement of everybody in the family,
I mean, he just doesn't have the profile. I mean,
right.
So you think about, you know, those other third-party candidates in the post-war period that have been pretty successful. You'd have to include in that Strom Thurmond,
sure,
States' Rights Party of 1948, George Wallace.
George Wallace in 1968. I was just about to talk about that because I think he got five. Right. He got like 5 states.
Yeah.
In the Electoral College, and that's like oftentimes when we talk about third-party candidacy, we talk about 1912, talk about 1992. We kind of left Strom Thurmond and then also George Wallace.
Yeah.
They're there in the history books, but it's not something that we often talk about. And George Wallace got 5 states. I mean, Ross Perot got 19% of the popular vote, but he did not win any states in the Electoral College.
Yeah.
So that was a formidable thing in that regard. So where do you see RFK, like in terms of you have to match him with a previous third-party candidacy? Would he be a spoiler, such as like Pat Buchanan and then Ralph Nader in 2000, Ross Perot Impact, or George Wallace, Strom Thurmond? Where do you put him, or is he going to be a standalone, a different category altogether?
Well, if I was forced, Mohsen, I probably would say that he's kind of a marriage of Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so what I mean by that is that, you know, Ralph Nader was one of your, he's a true believer.
Yes.
Ralph Nader has always been one of those
He's a
people.
consumer advocate. I mean, he's old known for that. I mean, just,
Yeah,
not safe at
and
any
a
speed.
terrific consumer advocate.
Sure.
Right. So successful in one case that he had a car basically totally taken off the road because it was
Right.
and he wrote a book, Unsafe at Any
Not
Speed.
safe at any speed, right? Yeah.
Right. So, but he was a true believer. Ralph Nader was one of these people that thought he was always right, and you could never change his mind about anything. Right. And I think Robert Kennedy is a little bit that's why he says a little bit like Nader. He became an anti-vaxxer pretty early in that movement, and much of his following is around the anti-vax. But if you know that history, that particular version of the relationship between childhood vaccination and autism came out of a flawed study that was done in Britain, and eventually got taken down by the scientific community because all the other follow-up studies couldn't find the relationship. But now, if you were paying attention to the evidence, that's the point at which, even if you had accepted that particular argument at that point in time, you'd say, okay, I was wrong.
Right.
But he's been on the same thread ever since, right?
Right.
And now we have all the accumulating evidence about what's happening to our kids, because there's a larger percentage of parents that won't get their children vaccinated. So we're seeing a resurgence of measles and mumps, diphtheria and whooping cough, and some deaths among children for those reasons, right? We've virtually eradicated these diseases. So, I mean, how much evidence do you need to say, get your kids vaccinated? Come on, whatever you believe, they deserve the protection, right? Sure. And their friends deserve the protection.
Right.
But if you're running for president, you ought to have at least 2 feet on the ground. You ought to be, in an issue like that, you ought to be looking at the evidence, thinking about it. And in that case, there are no two appropriate decisions. There's only one. All the evidence points in one direction.
Sure.
So in that sense, he's like Nader. Now, once he gets a hold of an idea, you're not going to change it. And I think those people are, to be honest with you, are always a bit dangerous. Now, why is he a bit like Pat Buchanan? So, on the other hand, he's got some populist tendencies, and obviously part of his appeal is, and that's why he's cutting into both the Biden and the Trump vote at the same time. He's pulling from both camps, at least at the moment, and because to some degree he's able to communicate at a grassroots level that seems to connect to people, right? And you put those two things together, and you're always going to have at least some following, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, speaking, since we brought Pat Buchanan, do you think there's kind of an influence, maybe a subliminal influence, on Pat Buchanan when he ran for the presidency in 1992, 1996, and then 2000 on Donald Trump? Because he had a very kind of really strong opinions about immigration, about building a wall and everything else. And then he was actually impugned by Trump, at that time. Like he was saying that he's a fascist. I mean, Trump was talking about Pat Buchanan at that time because he's not a Republican,
right?
He's not as conservative as he was today. And he also had the slogan, "Make America First," I think it was.
Yeah.
And Ronald Reagan, he coined the phrase "Make America Great Again." So I want to see what do you think? What's your take on Trump actually taking a little bit of maybe Ronald Reagan and Pat Buchanan in terms of aesthetics, in terms of using certain slogans, and also taking textbook passages out of Pat Buchanan's immigration policy. Do you think is that a real thing or not?
Well, no, I think those are some interesting threads that you suggest, Mohsen, and although I think if you look at Ronald Reagan, probably the only thing they seem to have in common, or at least I would think they have in common, is they have a way with words. They have the ability to, in a short soundbite, say a lot to a lot of people, right? Sure. Morning in America, Make
Yes.
America Great Again. I mean,
Right.
to be able to pull that off and make it stick, say it in a way that people find it persuasive. Not all of our politicians have that talent, and those two had it at a very high level. So I think but if you look at Reagan's values, he was a true marketplace Republican. He was not a cultural warrior. Now, I must say, in saying that, he also was not afraid to use the cultural variable when he thought it would help him. And he had this story about the welfare queen with the Cadillac and the mythical six husbands who were all drawing welfare checks, and there was no such person. But you knew clearly, and he never said that this was a black woman, but it was pretty clear from the description and the location and all the other stuff that in your mind, it was a black woman sitting behind the wheel of that Cadillac that was ripping off the welfare system. So now Trump was less subtle. That's not very subtle, but
Yes.
Trump was even less subtle. He's pretty pointed. So, but I think Reagan was really at its heart. He was a marketplace Republican, and Trump is much more of a culture wars Republican. That's one difference. The second thing is Reagan was an internationalist, and in terms of America's place in the world, and now pretty famous for standing up to the Soviet Union, and in some ways with the military buildup there, pushing the Soviet Union to the point of bankruptcy in terms of keeping up, and it played a part, not the sole part, in the collapse of the Soviet Union. But one of the things we sometimes don't think about the Reagan administration, because he wasn't there yet in terms of the pieces hadn't fallen into place, but he was arguing for free trade agreements during his presidency. Right. And now the first fruition of that, of course, was the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was negotiated under his successor, George H.W. Bush, and then passed into law under Bill Clinton. But that was Reaganism. He was very strongly in favor of global trade and lowering tariff barriers, and economics is a key to bringing nations closer together. That's not Donald Trump, even to a small degree. He's when he says America first, he wouldn't mind pulling up the walls at the border and keeping our economy inside and the other economies out, and keeping our people inside and other people out. That's not Reagan. And Reagan, as you know, one other thing about Reagan, he was president the last time that we had immigration reform.
Sure.
Yeah, very significant.
Yeah, the amnesty in 1986.
Amnesty, yeah, very.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I think there were about 3 million people affected by that.
Absolutely.
And we're talking about a smaller pool of undocumented. So, but again, that's not anywhere close to where Donald Trump is. So
yeah. And also in compare and contrast between the two, I mean, Reagan did much better in the re-election effort in 1984 than he did in 1980. Oh. He won 49 states. I mean, Walter Mondale only won the state of Minnesota, 49-1. I mean, the last time we had that was actually Nixon versus
McGovern.
Exactly, McGovern. Yeah, in 72, he did also better than he did in 1968.
So I should interrupt you. Can I interrupt you there for 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
The two states in which I've lived the longest period of time are Minnesota and Massachusetts. So I've been on the losing end 49-1 wherever I go.
Yes, I think Walter Mondale also he won DC as well, I think. So, but it's not a state.
That's not a state.
Yes, that's not a state. He was which is in by itself, it's like really an interesting thing to have representation in Congress. Okay, I mean this is really interesting. So Trump is let's kind of focus our efforts on the election we have now. What I meant at the beginning when I said that it feels like, with the exception of the fact that somebody is going through the trial because he's not really utilizing the incumbency because he's not an incumbent in real terms. But what I really meant to say is it seems like for maybe very few times we have two basically people. There's no newcomer. No one is selling us on the potential or the presidency. I mean, right now it's very simple. It's like you lived, if you are of age, you just kind of evaluate the situation between 2016 to 2020. If you think the country was better off that time, you vote for Trump. If you think between 20 to 24, you vote for Biden. So you have two people running on their records, not on the potential of how they might do when they get to office.
Yeah.
And it's astonishingly, it's neck and neck right now in many situations. How do you see the field? I mean, basically, why is Biden not granting that Trump is going through the trial and he's not even campaigning right now? He's going from one court to the courtroom. Why is Biden is not really doing as well? He's not utilizing the incumbency aside from not being in court.
So I made this argument about a year ago in a different context, is that about this deep into your presidency, people's views of you are pretty well locked in. And it's really hard to make changes except, small changes on the margin. And if you actually go back and look at virtually every major party nominee in the last 50 years, between the time that they basically came out on top in the nominating race, which is typically decided before you get to the convention, from that point to the general election, nearly all of them, their unfavorable rating has gone up. People have a lower opinion of them as the campaign goes along. Now, why is that? Well, they're being torn at by the other side. The other side's trying to tear them down. And we have a media that's kind of in the business of tearing both sides down. So you're mostly going to get bad press. And if you look at the press that Joe Biden has gotten, well, let's go back to 2016. What was the most heavily covered issue with Hillary Clinton? Foreign policy, the economy, immigration? No. Emails. Email. Right. And exactly what her email server had to do with being
37,000. I still recall that number. It's like,
well, that's the news media, right? And with Joe Biden, all about his age, right? Without, and you can look at all of this, the coverage of Biden's age, and I'll tell you what's really hard to find is the story that makes a case why age matters. Yes. And why it matters in a negative way,
right?
As opposed to having more experience, and maybe that might actually make you a better president.
Sure.
Or would even try to do a counterfactual. What would have Joe Biden done differently if he had been 20 years younger? If you can't answer that question, then you have to wonder kind of what's this issue about, other than something that's just gotten out of hand. And then you look at Trump. His coverage is going to center on all these trials, right? And we're going to lose sight. And with both candidates, then you lose sight of the real differences that you really care about here, right? Foreign policy, domestic policy, and the like. What they're going to do with the courts and with the agencies and all these other critical questions that we have. The questions of governing,
absolutely,
not who's going to be up and down in November, not about what the election consequences of aging and this is going to be. Let's talk about what really matters: the character of these individuals and their policy differences. That's and then if you think about a little bit more about it, the degree that we're going to talk about things in this campaign is going to be mostly on the issue side. It's going to be mostly about domestic policy. What do presidents do? They spend most of the time on foreign policy.
Right.
And the media don't pay much attention to foreign policy, right? The aid for Ukraine, yes. What's happening in Gaza, yes. But routinely, America's position in the world, those kinds of things, boy, that's a secondary story. So we're not well served by the sources of our information that ideally should be helping us make a choice. I think to some degree they send us off on these tangents. So we're not getting much help there. But I didn't answer your question. So here's the answer to the question, at least from my perspective. A question I would ask at this point in the campaign is whether one or both candidates have hit bottom. And I think if one of them has hit bottom and the other one hasn't, I'll put my money on the one that has hit bottom. Now, I think if I were to bet on this at this point, I would say probably Biden is probably closer to his bottom. That pretty much everything that's negative about Biden is out there. Whereas with Trump, we'll see how these trials play out. Right. And,
so that's going to be a big difference in terms of the next few
well,
months.
if you think about kind of the things that could, but again, I don't necessarily think the one that's going on in New York has much to do about the presidency.
Yes.
It certainly has to do with illegality, and we ought not to ignore that. And it certainly had something to do with how he ever got to the presidency. But that's not a question of what he would do with the presidency. I think too often we don't ask what they will do with the presidency as opposed to what's it going to take for them to get it, right?
Okay. Now, my take is on this is it's always been the case, but maybe right now it's more highlighted than ever before. I think you and I in the previous podcast we did talk about the constituency of a Republican president and a Democratic president, not just Biden versus Trump. It's I think we came across the fact that as a Republican president, and certainly in the case of Trump, the community or the constituency he's trying to impress is what we call maybe more homogeneous community, more homogeneous constituency. So if you had like 2 or 3, major platforms, you're going to connect with about 75, 85%, and that's all you pretty much need to kind of get you to the finish line. As in the case of any Democrat, and then maybe right now it's even ever more difficult to Biden. He has to build a coalition, and that coalition seems to be very fragile. Like right now, for instance, he needs the Jewish vote, he needs the Arab vote. Well, the Jewish and the Arabs are not on the same page. So how is he going to walk that fine line? Just a couple of days ago, his reflection on what's going on in Columbia University, and then about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that's going on campuses. And he did say, I'm against, anti-Semitics and everything else. And also we need to pay attention to what's happening in the daily lives of Palestinians. And that seems to kind of tick off certain individuals and certain groups. So how is he going to walk that fine line? He needs the Arab vote. He needs the Jewish vote. He needs multiple people in his polling for him. And those are not naturally kind of coexist together in an organic way. So how he is going to be able to walk that fine line, in your opinion?
So I don't think he can. Here's the reason, Mohsen. I think with these very high profile developments, like what's been happening in Gaza, to some degree, we form our opinions in that first month. And then it gets hard to change them after the fact. New information doesn't seem to dent very much our first impression. I think Biden's political mistake, you can argue about whether it was a mistake in terms of policy and all of that, politically was to embrace Israel 100% on day one, and basically green light. And say whatever it does, basically. We've got their back.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that was a huge political mistake. Again, you can argue about whether policy-wise, symbolically, it's the right thing. Politically, it really set him up because and we've seen this. He's not gained any traction from the conflict. He's lost support from this conflict.
Sure.
And so he hasn't pleased anybody.
Right. He managed to make almost everybody upset with him regarding that issue.
I think there's not much he can do right now to pacify. Now, some of those people may come back to him because they don't like the option. or they like
Like
the
the Michigan,
they don't like the
the
other.
uncommitted voters. Yeah.
Yeah, they may think the other guy is worse. So
That's what he's banking on. And that we know how that turned out for Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton actually, she said, maybe I'm not perfect, but then I'm going to vote for Trump. And then look what happened. I mean, so that's not a slam dunk,
yeah,
proposition here.
yeah.
So,
Well,
so the impact of the uncommitted voters in Michigan and Pennsylvania, more particularly in Michigan.
yeah,
I mean, the option is obviously if they don't vote for Trump, that's going to be those votes going to be lost compared to what happened in 2020.
yeah.
And if maybe they're not going to literally go and vote for Trump, but by them staying at home, that's a help for Donald Trump automatically.
Or going to Kennedy.
Or going to Kennedy. Okay,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
so Biden right now, is he going to start to play out for that, to kind of bring them back? It's like, hey, I'm not perfect, but I'm better than the other guy argument, or what is he going to do?
No, I mean, I think to some degree, he's going to be very dependent on surrogates too in these states, right? So they're going to be very important. To some degree, he's a damage messenger, and once you're a damage messenger, you can talk the talk, but you may not get anybody to walk
Right,
as a
right.
result, right? So to some degree, you got to have some other voices out there saying, look, president probably made a mistake at the beginning. Look what he's done since then. They can do that more easily and more politically more easily than he can, right? It's really hard if you're the president to stand up and say, I made a mistake, because usually the media dump all over you when that happens, right? So think about Jimmy Carter and his admission of error, and it never works. It just never works. So it's really you almost have to kind of stay the course. Of course, he's walking a different line. He's walking not the same line, but it's not moving the needle very much politically for him. But so he's going to stay on that line. That helps his surrogates to be more persuasive. It's kind of look at what's happened since. Look what he's been doing since, right? Look where he came down on this, and so on. And we'll see. Maybe with the U.S. putting the pressure on, maybe Israel won't go into Rafah. We'll see. I don't know whether that planned invasion, that'd be a bad thing for Joe Biden if that occurs. It'd be good for him if it doesn't happen. So does he have enough clout to get Netanyahu not to follow through? We'll see.
Now we're going to put our thinking hats on. Let's say, just hypothetically, if the Gaza situation and then the current conflict in the Middle East, and also Russia and Ukraine, if it happened under Trump's administration, how do you think predictably he would have acted differently, or would he done different things? What is the impact of Trump being at the helm, and then these international conflicts are happening?
Well, interestingly, I don't think they would be much different. Some of them wouldn't be any different. So let's go back to the withdrawal from Afghanistan. That was Trump's policy. Trump set the timetable. Biden inherited it. Biden stayed with it, and then the catastrophe of the withdrawal. I don't know why you would think it would have been any different, since it was Trump's plan that they were executing. And to some degree, one of the things that happens most, and as you know, is we overcredit and overblame the president of the United States. So, you put yourself, or have our listeners put themselves in the position. You're president of the United States. You're in the Oval Office. You're sitting behind your chair. Every morning, you get your intel briefing from the CIA and the other intelligence agencies. And across the board, they're all telling you that the Afghan army that we've built, we've created, armed, trained, is strong enough to hold the Taliban back for 3 to 6 months. And you're hearing that over and over again. And then what happens? they collapse in a day.
Absolutely.
So,
Yes.
so the reality that Biden was working off of was the intelligence reports. I mean, that was his best estimate as to what the next several weeks and several months would be like, what was going to happen there. But it turned out to be 100% inaccurate. So I don't see how that would have changed if Donald Trump had been sitting behind the chair and behind the desk in the Oval Office. Then you come to what we're seeing now in Gaza. Trump in some ways was as much a firm advocate of Israel as Joe Biden. It was Trump on the
Move the
move to the
capital.
capital to
Yes.
Jerusalem, right?
Yes. And it
And
was a promise made by many presidents.
yeah, but
And he actually using that. Hey, everybody promised. I was the one that delivered. Yeah.
so I don't see that he would have responded any differently in the first instance than Joe Biden. He would have embraced Israel. It had just been attacked in a horrific way, and so I think that would have played out at least in the beginning in the same way. Now, the one area where it would differ is when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that one, Biden and Trump do have
Different.
different views on Ukraine, and I don't think Trump would have come as quickly to Ukraine's aid. I don't think he would have tried to rally NATO in the same way that Biden did. Trump has never been a real fan of NATO, or at least since he was president, a fan of NATO. So there, I think you could plausibly make the argument it made a difference who was sitting in the Oval Office. Although I found it pretty interesting that whereas Trump 2 weeks ago or so earlier, a couple of weeks ago, said no aid for Ukraine. It's interesting that he changed his mind and endorsed that recent action by the Congress to provide Ukraine with aid. So
Yeah, it was Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. I think.
yeah, but you think about it a little bit. Why did he do that? I think Trump understands that the positions that he took in the primary and that he's kind of been taking post-presidency really appeal to his Republican base, but don't help him very much as you look toward the independent voters you're going to need to win the election. So I think he's starting to do a little bit of what often happens during the general election, a little bit of a move toward the center. And that to me is a move toward the center, is reframing of his abortion position to be a 15-week ban. That's a reframing of his position as opposed to anything more severe than that. That's moving a little bit more toward the center. These are kind of classic things that happen in the general election. I think Biden has always been a little bit to the center compared to his party's left. So I don't think he has much of a way to go in that direction, except on the question of immigration and how tough we're going to be on the border and the like.
Yeah. Now, Tom, circling back to the phenomena of Trump, despite the allegation and despite the courts and all the, criminal activities he was accused of, portraying, he managed to kind of stay above the fray in terms of his support. I mean, he lost some, he gained some. Demographically, who is a still true Trump supporter, and who did Trump lose in terms of not individuals, in terms of groups? Who did he like economically, demographically?
Yeah.
What's your thought on
So, he lost the groups where Republicans have been slipping anyway.
Okay.
So most of his loss has come among better educated Republicans, college educated particularly. He's lost some with women. There's been some loss in suburban areas where there's real concern about things like the quality of public education and the like, and so on. So I think most of the erosion with Trump has been where the Republican Party has been kind of eroding over the last 15 years. Now, the Republican Party, on the other hand, has been picking up votes in other places, and the working class white is very much still in Trump's camp. He won about 70% of that vote in 2020 and in 2016. They don't seem to have moved much. Evangelical Christians still very firmly behind Donald Trump, and they haven't moved much at all. So that's pretty rock solid, and they're pretty good sized groups. These are not small groups. These are very significant. Evangelicals are shrinking as a percentage of the population, but they have one of the highest turnout rates of any voting group, over 85%. Phenomenal turnout rate. So they not only vote 4-1 Republican, but they get out. They're there, and they haven't moved.
Very active, yes.
Yeah, very active. They haven't moved from Trump, and
they have moved from Trump because Trump is going to be using that. He hasn't been campaigning much, but he's going to use the 3 nomination or confirmation for the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Like 3 out of in 4 years, he's the luckiest president. In 4 years, he was able to do 3.
Yeah.
Very conservative, which moved the Supreme Court further. I mean, right now it seemed like Roberts is kind of like the swing vote, and sometimes when he was actually far right, but he didn't go anywhere. Just people like went right of him. So I mean, that's the way it happened.
Well,
so he's always going to use that card. Like, look what I was able to give you guys 3. I mean, he was also. I mean, he's going to use the fact that multiple presidents, or Republican presidents, or even Democratic presidents, have promised to move the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He managed to do that. He's going to connect, certain vote regarding that. They're going to vote for him based on that. And also the other one is the fact that overturning Roe v. Wade. That has something been talked about for the longest time, and he was the one able to do that by the virtue of his nomination. Yeah. So he's going to probably try to milk those 2 issues all the way to November. I'm not sure if they're going to stick or not, but he's definitely going to use them. So,
well, I think they'll stick with those groups, but but then they hurt in some other places. They hurt with the college educated. They hurt with women, right? So, none of these wedge issues kind of work with everybody. That's the idea behind the wedge issue. You win some, you lose some. Ideally, as a candidate, you pick the ones that give you more wins than losses. So, abortion looks at the moment, you're losing more than winning if you're on the Republican side with that one, but that hasn't played itself out fully yet. But we're in a pretty divided, as you know. I mean, this polarization is not just simply ideological. It's very much around identity, different groups and the like. That deepens it, hardens it, makes it harder to move. We don't have a lot of true swing voters anymore. We don't have very many split ticket voters anymore. We're either on one camp or the other camp. And when you get into that position, then you think about, well, I don't like my candidate all that much, but boy, it's a long way over to the other side. That classically is where someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. comes in. It gives you an out in some ways, right? You can't find yourself going all the way over to the other side, but you kind of don't want to do your side either this time because of who the player is. So, okay, let me take that third option, and I'll feel better about it. So it's a pretty good time to be a third-party candidate. It's just that to some degree, he had one thing the others haven't had. Jill Stein is Jill Stein. I mean, who knows about Jill Stein? Who really cares about Jill Stein? Maybe Jill Stein. But he brings name recognition, right? He brings a level of activism around a certain issue that's built a following. In some ways, he's got the profile of someone that could be a successful third-party candidate. Now, if he wasn't so flawed, if he had a little bit of political experience that he could hearken to about why he's really ready to be president, right. If he some of his ideas weren't so far out in la la land that they weren't so easily parodied and ridiculed. He might be a formidable contender this time.
Right.
Right.
And what do you think of the impact of him picking his running mate? I mean, there's a lot of talk about like Jesse Ventura being one. I mean, multiple people, but I mean, he did not pick that. So do you think that's going to make an impact on the fact that he picked who he picked for the vice presidency, or it's at this point it doesn't matter?
None directly, I think I think there's no direct effect. There's an indirect effect. One thing she has, which he doesn't, is extraordinarily deep pockets. She's very wealthy.
Yes.
And one big obstacle that any third party candidate faces in the US, as you know, is
finance.
The financing, getting on the ballot. And
Sure.
It starts with getting on the ballot. If you're a Democrat or Republican candidate, those two parties automatically are on the ballot in all 50 states. In most states, if you're not in that position, you've got a petition to get yourself on the ballot. Right. And in some states, it's pretty onerous. And therefore, you have to go collect signatures from registered voters. And they have to be willing to basically sign the petition. And they're going to get checked. So you got to give yourself a cushion. You got to get a lot more than the minimum, withstand the scrutiny. That's very pricey stuff. Right. And so I think her value actually is in increasing the likelihood that he can get on the ballot in lots and lots of states. Left to his own resources, simple volunteers, I think they would have struggled to get on even a quarter of the. Now, then you'll ask which quarter, right? And the ones you care about are the battleground states, of course. You don't much care if he's on the ballot in California if you're a Democrat, or if he's on the ballot in Mississippi if you're a Republican. You know how that state's going to go, right? It's the Pennsylvanias and the Michigans and the Wisconsins and Arizonas and so on. Those are the ones you're looking at. And can he get on those ballots? And I know he's on the Michigan ballot. I'm not sure about how well he's faring on the other battleground states, but.
So yeah, that's going to be interesting. It'll be really a fun campaign. It's going to be very unpredictable. Anything can happen. It has all the major, points of really making it a great election in many ways. We're going to watch it. It's going to be watching a great movie unfold. So we'll be hanging on to those, results. Actually, the election night will be very interesting.
And there's going to be some real consequences when we walk out of the theater.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You think you're going to be potentially like maybe one or two debates, presidential debates? What are the likelihood of kind of like a Ross Perot situation where RFK would be invited to those debates, or as of now, it's going to be just probably Biden versus Trump, or is it potentially going to be inviting third parties, or it's not going to happen yet?
Well, I don't know what the rule is now. I'm sorry, I haven't kept up on that, but there was a rule.
Yes.
If you got above a certain percentage.
15%, it was. Yeah, it was. And that's what happened was with a couple of times people came close to it.
Yeah.
And then they kind of fizzled and gone away. So,
yeah. So I don't know if that rule is still in place with the Presidential Debate Commission. I don't know if that's still there.
Last time I checked, which is not that long ago, it's still in existence.
Yeah, okay. Well, then if he's above that level, he will be part of the debate.
Part of the debate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you ask, who's that going to help?
Exactly. It's gonna be interesting. I think it would have been it'll be kind of neat because honestly, the debates. I mean, presidential debates are always fun to watch, but when you have a third element, like honestly, Ross Perot when he was invited in those three debates that they had, especially the town hall one, the first one, he actually added a little bit of element to it, and then also you can see how seasoned politicians talk and how Ross Perot talk.
Yeah.
It's just like like a plain spoken person, and he that's why he connected. That's why he connected. He was just saying, and one time I think he was in Larry King and with Al Gore, I think, and he said the difference between me and Al Gore, if I see a snake, I kill it. if Al Gore sees a snake, he forms a committee. So I think that was when Larry King was like, Larry
Yeah.
King started laughing,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay,
Well, I mean, the other thing about what happened with Perot, that was not good for George H.W. Bush, right? So basically, it was 2-on-1 in that debate, as both Perot did a little beating up of Clinton, but mostly he was beating up on George H.W. and part of it was because H.W. had negotiated NAFTA, and Perot was really dead set against NAFTA. Said some famous words in that. You're going to be a giant sucking sound going south. The
yes, yes,
jobs are going to go into Mexico, right?
right,
And
right,
so yeah, that hurt Bush. Now, the
yes,
interesting thing to kind of, as a just thinking ahead, most, and we don't know what's going to actually happen, but let's imagine we got Biden, Trump, and Robert Kennedy on the debate stage in late September. Who's Kennedy's president's going to help or hurt in the context of the debate, not not in the over the vote in the general election, but just in those 90 minutes.
right.
You know,
It's going to be interesting. It's
yeah,
going to be interesting.
and I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
I think was it 60 Minutes? Who did the interview with Robert
Yes. 60 minutes.
Jr.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
basically he was asked who is more dangerous, and he says Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Yes, I
Yeah,
remember.
so you don't know where he's coming from on
Yeah.
these.
I think that would be kind of an interesting debate, to have like three different personalities, three different, everybody's it's like really being an orchestra and everyone's playing a different instrument, and then they're not going to be in sync with one
Yeah,
another.
not at all.
So it would be kind of an interesting thing to watch. I would definitely love to watch that in that aspect. And if I
Another,
if I get a chance to actually lower the expectations of, meaning the requirement to be part of that debate, I would do that
yeah,
just for the sheer entertainment value of
yeah,
it,
yeah.
aside from the fact that who's going to be at the helm at the end. So
And
yeah, it's
and
gonna be
and,
it's gonna be a lot of fun.
and and Kennedy, I mean, it's hard to figure out exactly what's the interesting metaphor here, but it's almost like having two planets, uh, Trump and Biden, and then one moon.
Exactly. He's like right there. Yes,
And
absolutely, absolutely.
the tug of war between the planets over the moon and the moon trying to spin off on its own. It could be real theater, but the question is, with all of these things, Mosin, are we serving the public? Are the way we do our campaigns,
Mhm.
are we serving the voters' needs to make an informed decision about the direction of the country, and in the case of the president, who should be sitting in that chair in the Oval Office? And I just think to some degree we've kind of turned so much of our campaigns into theater, and it really doesn't inform the judgment
Absolutely,
of the public.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Tom, we've been going on an hour. It really, I say that, in the past podcast, but it doesn't feel like we've been going at it for an hour. And I know we have about maybe 10, 15 minutes to
Yeah.
kind of finish this podcast, and I'm really enjoying every minute of it. Aside from us meeting on podcast, I've had the pleasure of meeting you in person, and then
Oh,
offside. Oh,
that's always been fun.
thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
and hopefully we get to do another
Oh,
one
sure. Yeah.
soon enough. Aside from the topic we picked for our for my podcast with you, we had side conversations, and in terms of presidency and personalities. And I know you have a lot of work and you have a lot of research regarding competency and the personality of the people, and how we've gone. Maybe at some point we used to focus a lot on competency and then less on the personality, and now it seems to be the exact opposite direction. I think if I remember one thing you told me, McKinley, he did not even campaign. He was just like people coming in, and then if you want to hear about the campaign, come over and I'll talk to you about it in my porch, and then you just go make a decision.
Right.
He doesn't go to the people; people come to him. He was maybe, in order for somebody to do that, you have to be very confident and very competent in order for you to do that, for people to come in and get that information. And also in passing, we talked about James Barber and predicting performances of presidents, like who is the safe type, who is the most dangerous type. So if we can spend a few minutes talking about the C and the P factor, the competency versus personality, and then also who's better fit, um, what kind of personality is better fit, and what kind of competency personality dichotomy going on in picking the next president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the
But that's a
framework.
45-minute conversation. I'm just trying to.
Well, but the short version. So, if you read Madison's notes to the Constitutional Convention, they were the office that concerned them the most was the presidency, right? They were going to create an executive with some power, and they were they were worried about political power because they had just fought a war to overturn arbitrary power in the form of an executive, the King of England. And so they worried about what the occupant of this Oval Office wasn't. There was no Oval Office at the time. We didn't have the West Wing yet. We didn't even have the White House yet. But the occupant of the presidency, what that person would be like, should be like, and what they talked about was background. Have you basically paid your dues? Have you learned how to govern? Do you have experience in this realm? Right. You're not just coming off the street into the presidential office. Do you have character? Are you a person of integrity? Right. This is very important to them. These things mattered enormously to the writers of the Constitution. They thought that's the kind of leader this country needs going forward and needs every time. And now they found that leader in Washington, George Washington in the first instance. But if you read, Hamilton and Federalist Papers, they also talked about what they didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the candidate who was really good at what they called the little arts of popularity.
Sure.
The one who could stir up the public and draw public attention and public passion, and basically rode that horse to power. That was the person they were really suspicious of and didn't want to see ever get into the Oval Office. And then you look at the evolution of our campaigns, and we've reformed the system in major ways 3 times. Every time we've elevated the importance of popularity. And now, if you think about it, how do you get to be a presidential nominee? You got to win primaries or caucuses. You got to be popular, and
be popular enough. Yes,
you're popular enough, and popularity and competence don't necessarily go together. So it doesn't mean that the voters shouldn't have a say, and that popularity doesn't matter. It mattered actually in the case of Washington even. They wanted Washington because he was popular, and they knew if he was at the helm, there would be more confidence in the new government. So having public support can be a very critical part of being an effective president. But the ability just to win over the public, they thought, boy, that's the person we need to avoid.
Right.
So
just very quickly, Tom,
that's the way you get to be president.
Yes, one can argue is the fact that we have electoral college is to actually make sure that in case the public is going to be infatuated with the wrong person, then the electoral college can be like the final arbiter in determining the presidency. Would you buy into that, or no?
Well, theoretically it could be, but practically it's not, because the states bind the electoral vote to the popular vote. So
Right.
You win the state, you get its electoral votes. You can still have the elector that defects, right? And
at this day and age, it's not a good idea.
not a good idea. You may not live through the next
Right,
year.
right,
If it tips the presidency, you probably better go find yourself, get yourself into the protection witness program.
Exactly, absolutely. At this day and age, I agree.
Right. So I don't think I think in theory it's there, but in practice, it's not there. And of course, it would only trigger in the case where the election was so close that a couple of the electors could switch and change the outcome. But no, we are where we are. So you live with the system you have. And what you'd like to see is the voters to kind of step up and think a little harder about what it takes to lead this country, what qualifications are desirable in a president, win or lose.
Right.
And then you want the media to be thinking about this, and then ideally you want other political leaders thinking about this. I mean, if you go back to the idea of the electors, this was the other political leaders that in the first instance were going to be the electors, because they had the experience, they had the judgment. And I think we're getting a little too much followership and not enough leadership out of our political leaders.
Right. Yeah, just one thing that when I introduced the topic of presidency, I often talk about the competency and personality and how it matters, and also talk about the Barber impact of predicting presidency. And we talked about the different types. Obviously, you have to be either active or passive, you have to be positive or negative. And he actually depicted the most dangerous type we could ever have in the Oval Office will be someone who's active and negative, and the best case scenario, someone who's active positive, which right now we don't have, So we have a safe bet, which is someone who's passive positive. So we actually took the poll in different classes that I teach, and everybody agreed, even the people that supporting Donald Trump, they said Donald Trump is active negative, which makes him the most dangerous type. And then the people kind of also agreed with the fact that Joe Biden will be passive positive, which makes him a safe bet. He's not what we aspire, but he's a little bit better than, which kind of goes back to the beginning of it. And I think Joe Biden at some level, he's probably think there's no way, Donald Trump will win with all this shenanigans going on. But I think at some point also Hillary Clinton bet on that in 2016, and then we know what happened. So that basically kind of interesting. Honestly, the C and the P factor, the competency versus personality, that's really a whole podcast altogether. Really very fascinating.
And so is Barber's
yes, absolutely
typology, right? So you look at it, it's fairly simple. It's a 2x2 table, right?
Yes.
But it makes a heck of a lot of difference whether you're
exactly. And to me, honestly, the fascinating thing, it's like one of my favorite books because it's kind of forward looking. And he predicted in 1969 when he wrote the article, the fact that in certain deficiencies in Nixon's personality is going to lead to his demise. And then later on, Watergate happened, and we know what happened. Even in 1992, 1991, he predicted what's going to happen with Bill Clinton, and he said based on his, performance. Womanizing and all that stuff is going to come and get him later on. That was 6 years prior to what happened with his impeachment. So he's got a lot of people think, hey, he's maybe onto something. So it's a political science book that actually it's really focusing on what's going to happen down the line. So kind of like parody of the different personalities that we have and different level of activities, and it's kind of an interesting book. Psychology meets politics.
And Dave Barber was a friend of mine. He's now deceased.
Yes.
If you're looking for his book, listeners, it's James David Barber. But
David Barber, absolutely.
But he always went by Dave.
Yes.
And Dave and I would argue about Nixon.
Okay.
Which cell Nixon belongs in.
Really? Okay.
Well, there's a certain negative aspect to Nixon, personality-wise. There's a certain positive side in terms of he had some really interesting ideas about active government. Right. So, Nixon is, I think you could do a semester-long course on Richard Nixon.
Absolutely.
He's one of the most fascinating presidents. Now, you caricature him as we do it with all historical figures, now we have this caricature of the guy who resigned the presidency, the one and only.
Right.
But if you wanted to see a bundle of contradictions,
Yes.
but when you have a bundle of contradictions, then you have trouble putting them in a category.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Nixon is really a fascinating character. I mean,
Yeah.
the way he did with the, opening the relations with China and then Russia. I mean, Soviet Union. I mean, he really the detente, and then it was really a fascinating thing.
Yeah,
But he was also Mr. Interpreted. Like I just came across. I mean, I knew that a long time ago, but he was like a really a good pianist. He played his piano really wonderfully. But he's also, when you look at him as in comparison to JFK, JFK is always playing football, having fun, and then Nixon walking fully dressed on the beach. It's like, oh, who does that? It's like, come on. So he's really fascinating. If it wasn't for the Watergate,
yeah.
It would have been really ranked really high.
Oh, sure. And look at his economics. They didn't, talk about contradictions. So here's a marketplace Republican.
Mhm.
At one point, he proposes a guaranteed annual income for every American family. That's socialism.
That's socialism, absolutely.
Right.
He didn't call it that, but it was socialism.
He does wage price controls.
Exactly.
That's the authoritarian state does those kinds of things. Right.
Right.
He embraces Keynesianism. We are all Keynesians now.
Yes.
That was
economics.
that was Democratic Party orthodoxy.
Absolutely.
And then he does all these other things on the regulatory side and the like that look more like business, except he also the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, now the target of Republicans,
Exactly.
was a Nixon baby. So
Yes.
he's a really fascinating person.
Yes, and internationally as well. He did a lot regarding that.
Yeah.
Regarding particularly China and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
He can set the stage up for.
So, but we could do one of these people or a couple of them.
I would love to. I mean,
These are so fun, Mohsen.
Yeah, there really is a lot of fun. I mean, to me, honestly, the James Barber thing, to me, there's not a lot of people that actually, even in the discipline that covers him and talks about him. Sometimes in passing, I said James David Barber. People are like, I have no idea. So when I talked to you about it, then I was fascinated the fact that you actually knew him. So I'm to the point of like I really want to do one, because when I did that in my class, students were fascinated with the whole thing. Like, hey, this is really fun. And what is the book? What is it called? And can you give us the PowerPoint? Because I do have a PowerPoint regarding that. And I was been trying to actually have a podcast just based on the personality of the presidency. And I'm come to the point. I don't want to pressure you into doing one, but honestly, I'm probably going to do one just me, like a monologue. Just kind of depicting the whole thing. But honestly, Tom, you always, if I would love to, invite you back at some point, and then kind of do one regarding Nixon, regarding James David Barber about the whole thing, and then that'd be wonderful. That'd be great, honestly.
We're going to need a visual aid for that one.
Yes,
we got to show the tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely do that. Even we can, when we're doing one, hopefully maybe
be fun.
More deep into the C and the P. We can also use the PowerPoint to kind of like make the illustration how far we've gone from the C to the P. Okay, it's we're going on. And I know you have a meeting coming up, but just one last concluding thoughts regarding this. And I get this question a lot from youngsters, from students, colleagues, everybody. They just are very disenchanted with what's going on in the political arena today, and the way they feel like all the candidates running, they don't have a particularly a voice, and then sometimes what they do, like I don't feel like this person is my candidate, this person is my candidate, but they have maybe a certain allegiances to third party candidates, not necessarily RFK, but maybe RFK as well. And then they are bombarded by information like you're throwing away your vote, you're spoiling the election. Why would you vote for someone who doesn't have a shot of winning? What would be a good advice for someone who's going to enter the political arena in terms of voting? But would they vote for someone who has the best chance of winning, but not their candidate? Or should they go on a limb and vote for someone, even though they believe in that someone, but having said that, they know that person is not going to win? What should we be telling young people?
Well, I think we could advise them to make a choice, but recognize what they're choosing by doing one versus the other. The one vote is symbolic, and the symbolism can be important. That's basically saying neither of the above. That we need more alternatives in our politics. We need change. And the other is more strategic. You want to make a difference. Then actually you decide, okay, these are the two that have a realistic chance of winning, and they pick that one. Now, there is a way of voting that gets you to do both, and that's ranked choice voting, right? So, if you're lucky enough to be in one of those states with ranked choice, like Maine, you can cast a symbolic vote and also have it be an instrumental strategic vote. So in that case, you can vote for the third party candidate as number one. Your second choice is the one of the two party candidates that you like better. And once your third party candidate predictably loses, then your vote switches over to the
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So, so maybe what people in that situation ought to do is lobby their elected officials to adopt ranked choice voting in their state.
Yeah. And Maine also is one of two states that actually do proportional electoral college.
Yeah.
That would be another episode by itself, just electoral college. Maine and Nebraska, I think they're the ones doing it. That's also an interesting choice, and it has to be up to the states to adopt those as well. Yeah.
Now it's interesting. Strategically, it makes all sorts of sense for Maine to do that, and because Maine actually is at this moment a purple state. It's going blue, and it will probably be fully blue at some point. Nebraska is a more interesting example. It's a red state,
right.
And if it didn't have that rule, all those votes would go to the Republicans.
We'll go for it, yeah.
So
I get
actually working against their self-interest, right? Which is really that's unusual in politics.
Right. It makes a big difference actually if a big state, for instance, doesn't have to be the biggest state. It doesn't have to be California or Texas, because right now it would be idiotic for California to do that, because they're going to be sharing some of those 54 to the Republican side, even though they've been dominating. Texas is the same way, even though Texas is moving more into the purple category. But it definitely makes a huge difference, maybe in a swing state, like a typical swing state, like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida, to kind of do that. Like this way is going to increase the level of participation, and it's not going to be winner take all. So you're going to be sharing some of that, and then you're not going to be just denied getting some of those electoral votes. But that's a fascinating thing, because that would solve many issues about your vote is not being counted. And that's probably systemically is going to increase the level of participation among people. Because right now, let's say you're in California and then you're a Republican. You probably think, you know what, well, my candidate is going to lose anyway, so why go vote? And also a Democrat, you're probably going to say, you know what, the line is too big. I'm not going to vote because my candidate is going to win anyway. So it kind of like really suppresses, and then also it eliminates the fact that when was the last time a politician went and really did a campaign during the final week of the campaign in California? The only time they go there is for like a fundraising dinners and everything else. But it's the far gone conclusion. Trump is not going to go campaign there. He's going to go to Ohio or to Florida or to Pennsylvania, where it could go either way. So it might solve a lot of problems in terms of my vote counting more than yours, depending on the state that we're living in. So,
but unless you can get all the states to do it,
right?
If you're a blue state, it makes no sense to do it. If you're a blue state,
blue state, red state. If you're
a red state, it makes no sense to do.
It makes no sense. The only starting point will be the swing state, because hey, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Why don't you want to share the win a little bit? Because we're going to be separated. We don't know who's going to win anyway.
Yeah.
So you want to just kind of like split in the middle and then kind of get some credit, because you know you're going to be a formidable candidate at the end. So if
I've got an idea for you.
There you go.
So we do have sunset legislation. So Actually, the assault weapons ban that was passed, I think, in 1994 had a 10-year sunset provision. And once that 10 years passed, the only way you were going to keep the assault weapons ban is if Congress renewed it, and it didn't, which is why we don't have a ban on assault weapons, even though we had one. But how about a sunrise?
There you go.
Now, here's the concept. So I'm in Florida, right? Which, or let's say I'm in Texas. Texas is better. So Texas right now, I think I would still say reddish purple. Yeah,
Yes.
so mostly Republican. So, but if some of the projections are right, it may be 15 years out from now, it may be tilting over toward blue. Maybe. So if you're worried about that, you pass sunrise legislation. So you're in power now, you keep all your electoral votes, and then you pass a law that says 15 years from now, we'll go to a proportional system.
There you go. Okay. Yeah.
Right. That way you keep all of them now, and then when you start to get to be the minority, you still get a chunk of them. So I'm just being cynical, but
It's a start. I mean, it's at least at some point there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
my point is about the logic of it. I mean,
Absolutely.
if everyone else is playing the unit game, you have to play the unit game, right?
Right. Kind of like the way it is. Like we're gonna change the format as long as we're winning, we're okay.
Yeah,
Kind
right.
of like the way it reminds me when they have the dream team in basketball,
Yeah.
because the college kids were getting beat in the Olympics, and they were saying, we're gonna send the big guns now, right now, because it's not fair anymore. Because the college kids were doing it, and then
Yeah.
at some point they start getting beat by different places. So you know what? Enough.
Yeah.
We need the gold medal. We gotta send the big guns, and that's what's exactly happening, because the competition globally has kind of became more competitive.
Well,
So it's kind of like this, pretty much the same kind of logic behind it.
yeah,
So
I mean, there's that old adage of the golden rule of politics, right? He who makes the rules gets the gold.
absolutely,
And
there's no question about it.
that's very true in
Very
politics.
true.
You can
I
set
get
the
asked this
rules.
question multiple times. A lot of students, they say, how come we don't have, we have a country of choices. I mean, we have a plethora of choices when it comes to everything.
Yeah.
Even water it has flavors. It's unbelievable. But when it comes to our political system, we're rather primitive.
Yeah.
It's a Republican or Democrat, and the system was built based on Madison's writing to the Constitution, talk about factions, and then encourage having multiple parties and everything else. We're designed to be a multiple party, a system, but we're not. So people saying, how come we don't have third parties as a viable choice? And I would say the only way a viable choice, they will become a viable choice. The Republicans and the Democrats have to actually change their minds about that. Because right now, the people that are making the choices and the decision are Republicans and Democrats.
Yeah.
That's not going to change unless they change their mind. So basically, that's what's going to happen. Tom, I know you have a meeting coming up. It's been really wonderful. It's been a lot of pleasure talking to you.
I like it better when we meet in person, which happens pretty often, which I enjoy. But the next best thing is the virtual. So it's
absolutely. I'm looking forward to the next one. Hopefully in person. If not, another episode
terrific.
talking about something fun as well. So it's been very enlightening, very very interesting. Just one last thing. I know you got to go. Just predicting, like right now, forward ourselves into November. Tomorrow is the election. Based on everything today, what is the makeup of the whole thing? What's going to happen if the election is held next week or this week? If tomorrow is Tuesday,
if I had to bet my house on it, I probably would go with Biden.
Okay.
But I would much prefer not to be forced to bet my house.
Okay, I see. Okay, based on the way you talked about, like hitting rock bottom, and then the allegations.
Too many uncertainties. There's too many uncertainties.
Too many uncertainties. Okay. Yeah. With that, we conclude this really very very interesting episode with Professor Tom Paterson from Harvard University. Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the very very soon, hopefully in person or another podcast as well. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you very much. And then I promise you guys, whoever is listening, we're going to have one of those, hopefully, maybe about the personality, competence, personality regarding the presidency in time to kind of make a good decision, a good informed decision who will be the good candidate. My one lasting thought I talk to my students, said, I want you guys to vote. Who you vote for is your choice. I'm not here to brainwash you into something you don't want to be. I'm not here in the brainwashing business, but we have to kind of give a chance for everyone. And then my goal is to get everyone to get involved in the process. Who you vote for is your personal choice, and that's just the way it's going to work. So thank you, Tom, again, and then looking forward to the next one coming up soon. Thank you.
Take care, Mohsen.
Thank you.
Cheers.